Hi, my name is Bart Weyand. I'm going to read you two excerpts from a new novel by Sebastian Barry called Old God's Time, which was written last year. And I'll give you a little outline so you can understand sort of what I'm reading about. Recently retired policeman Tom Kettle is settling into the quiet of his new home, a lean-to annexed to a Victorian castle overlooking the Irish Sea. For months he has barely seen a soul, catching only glimpses of his eccentric landlord and a nervous young mother who has moved in next door. Occasionally, fond memories return of his family, his beloved wife, June, and their two children, Winnie and Joe. But when two former colleagues turn up at his door with questions about a decades-old case, one that Tom never quite came to terms with, he finds himself pulled into the darkest currents of his past. A beautiful, haunting novel in which nothing is quite as it seems. Old God's Time is about what we live through, what we live with, and what may survive of us. Tom Kettle is the protagonist, and he is a retired policeman and a detective, and he lives in Dalkey, which is the south suburb of Dublin in Ireland. And I'm going to, he thinks a lot in his head about things in the past that has happened to him. He's on his way to help these two colleagues solve this case, even though he's retired. And he's on the train going from Dalkey to Dublin and to the police station. And he's admiring the scenery. And he's just getting off the train. So he got off at Westland Row Station. City of Death, Lincoln Place Gate, South Leinster Street. Now he made his way along Westland Row itself, and memories were lying in ambush everywhere. May 1974. Merciful God. Up in Harcourt Street, they had heard 3 explosions. Fleming was in his mid-30s then, still his equal in rank. The two of them went down like hares through St. Stephen's Green, searching for the source of the noise. Galloping between the rose beds, the bush pushchairs, the bunny babies, the tuppenny deck chairs. Make way for the boys in blue, or grey suits anyhow. Sirens now and fire tenders and the silent forms of people looking back towards the sound, not in the least knowing what it was. Down Kildare Street, their bodies sweating, their boots a dreadful weight. And in the distance, something to make your hearts quail with dread. Even a policeman's hardened heart. Things lying on the road below that looked like cuts of meat. Had someone blown up a butcher's? Slowing down then to take in the scene, then stopping, panting, trying to take it in, trying. Shoppers, right enough, or people heading home. They must have been, in the instant before the explosion. Standing at their accustomed bus stops, getting a last message from a shop before it closed. Checking in their minds they had all they needed for the tea. Would Joe or Janet or Bill or Brenda be home yet before them? All the secrets and honesties equal before the blast. And then the blast, bursting everything known and usual to smithereens. Every window in the street blown in a violent cascade, and the bomb debris and the looser items of the street. And the window glass all turned into weaponry now against the soft bodies of the citizens, and rending them and tearing them and undoing them, till Tom saw more clearly what he had thought were cuts of meat. Black smoke everywhere, and the cuts of meat, some of them neatly squared, smoking, blackened. But it was sections of those just recently living souls. Oh, some still living, a head and a torso with the mouth moving, the eyes open in bloodied faces, and some still whole in their blast-torn coats, here and there, kneeling to the imploring faces, saying words that Tom could not hear, prayers maybe, or whispering. He could sort of lip-read what they were saying, though he didn't have that skill, not until that moment. Well, it's not too bad. Hold on if you can. The ambulances are on their way. Don't worry, dear. Don't fret, my friend. Help is coming. Lie quiet. Lie quiet. You'll be okay. Don't worry. Don't fret. Ah, sure, Jesus. Ah, sure, Jesus. And all the vowels and consonants trying to fashion good speeches, offer simple words. But it was the kneeling figures that nearly hurt Tom most. And Fleming appalled beside him, the two of them rendered into mere witnessing humans. The long Georgian street of blood and body parts and smoke still rising, and the cries suddenly of the terribly wounded, coming into his ears, as if he had been temporarily deafened. And now the cries were in his ears, and now the words of the dying. "Oh, sacred Mother of Jesus, protect me. Oh, God, tell my wife how I died, and that I love her. I love her. Will you tell her that, please? And I will. I will do that. I will." There are things worse. There were worse things and worst things, he remembered thinking. The two of them kicking into gear, helping the young Gardaí who poured in to block off the side streets. Leinster Lane and the like, and close the roads at Clare Street and Nassau Street. And be on the watch to let in the ambulances and the other personnel of catastrophe. They had no idea what was happening or why it happened or who did it. Only that radios crackled out that there were fearsome casualties in Parnell and Talbot Streets. Talbot, your man who wore the chains around his body, a penitential man. What terrible penance was this thrust on these ordinary souls going home on a May evening, their day in town done. A girl with twins in her stomach in Parnell Street, June told him when he finally got home himself, as weary as a hunting dog that had run over rough ground from sunrise to sunset. On the news at 9, there was a shot of South Leinster Street, taken from behind the barrier he himself had helped erect. He thought he could see himself away there in the distance under the railings of the college for just a moment, busying himself with spontaneous tasks. There was no training for that. Far away in Dean's Grange, the two of them sat, counting the blessings of their children, of their lives. He began to tremble in his chair, seismic trembling, and sweating. He was groaning so loudly the children climbed out of their beds and came down to sit with them, curling up against them both. Joe in his Thomas the Tank Engine pajamas, Winnie in her new nightie all the way from London. There were worse things and worst things. His trembling got so bad, June called Dr. Brownlee, who hurried down from his house in Monkstown, gave him 2 tablets to calm himself, his bald head nodding, his eyes anxious and sympathetic, many miles beyond the call of duty. Political bombs with personal outcomes. Dr. Brownlee nodded his head again. You've had a terrible experience. Your body is in shock, just like after a battle in a war. I was in Malaya, Tom said, and I never trembled there. This is different, said the doctor. This is close to home. My home, said Tom, as if to say so was a home in itself, a destination, all he needed to say, my home. And he felt the very rooms of the little house around him like an embrace and a solace. But all the same, the next morning he was trembling again, and he trembled for a week. And he had only been a helper, a policeman running to assist. What earthquakes must those others be enduring? The kneeling people, the supplicants on the tar road, the spouses, the aunties, the uncles, the fathers, the mothers, the children. A plague of trembling. We tremble before thee, Lord, that you have sent this calamity on our houses. My beloved city, Tom thought, this is not my city. All the more beloved, I must guard it. I must guard it. For years after, no cars were allowed to park on the For years after, no cars were allowed to park on the streets, in case there would be a repeat of this enormous offense. It was bombs left in cars had done it. Cars left in the streets by human hands. The drivers walking away, leaving the ticking things behind them. Oh, blessed shoppers, oh, blessed wayfarers, oh, blessed babies in the womb. Was he trembling a little now, these 20 years later? He felt the stirrings of old responsibilities. That was I read that one not because of the gore and blood, because it was a bomb in Dublin in 1974, and I was a student at Trinity College. I was coming out of a lecture on Friday, May 1974, when that bomb went off. I went home. It took me about 15 minutes to the back gate of Trinity to walk home. I got into the kitchen, and when I was doing something in the kitchen, I heard this noise, this loud noise. And I went out to the street and saw nothing on Raglan Road where we were living. But I went back into the kitchen and turned the radio onto RTE and found that the bombs had went off. On Nassau Street was one of them. There were 33 people were killed. And it wasn't the IRA, it was a retaliation bomb from the north. But Dublin was fairly safe in those days, but that particular incident did happen. And it was part of my life. Okay, so there's Tom. He's going to help his colleagues. And now, in real time, present time, he's going home. And he's on his way home. He has a bag of some packet of sausages and some potatoes. And he lives in a flat, in a sort of castle on the ocean. And he has a little flat, and he lives by himself. He's widowed. And that's important. But his neighbor he's had this turret with a gun, a rifle, that he shoots cormorants way out in the ocean. He has a scope for some reason. And he's also a cellist. And his name is Ronnie McGillicuddy. And Tom has never really met him, but he's lonely, and Ronnie asks him in for a drop of whiskey. So I don't want to read all that, so I'm explaining it. So I'm jumping a little bit here, but it's just another scene, and again, thinking in his brain. You want to go? You want to go, Tom, said Ronnie. She's loaded. That's the gun. Tom looked in surprise at Ronnie, as if this had never entered his mind. Well, it had not. The smallest imaginable pieces of gold and silver light were rioting tinnily everywhere. For a moment, he couldn't remember if the sun should be in front of them. If so, the cosmos had swallowed it whole, or behind them. The sun knew for itself and was going down behind the glassy house and the hill, all out of view, the other side of the castle. But the light was piercing through the flowerless leaves of a passion flower that Ronnie had held captive in a big pot. The climbing plant was held upright by a skinny trellis stuck in the soil. The tripod was another upright thing, and another was a music stand with a sheet of music on it, close by Ronnie's chair, and the deep crimson brown of the cello. Tom thought that yoke must be worth a few bob. The title of the sheet music was Kol Nidrei, K-O-L, Nidrei, N-I-D-R-E-I, in clear black letters, a phrase that might have bamboozled him, might have bamboozled anyone, but it struck a chord in him, a memory from long ago. Now the silver and gold light seemed to have got into his eyes, and it went in there and was dancing there. He was nearly blinded. Kol Nidrei. Even as he rose to the gun, with Ronnie closely watching him, sipping his whiskey, Tom hadn't touched a drop, as he did not drink, of course. But he had always been happy to receive the glass and hold it in the interests of courtesy. He was asking his old head what the phrase was. When he was 17, only a few months in the army, he'd been told he was being sent to Palestine. Yes, he remembered now, those bloody booklets. They were still somewhere in the sacred boxes. Would he ever unpack them? He couldn't say. His sergeant had given him a booklet about Arab feast days and holy days, and Jewish feast days and holy days, so he wouldn't cause offense to the inhabitants in Palestine. As if his gun wouldn't do all that on its own. And booklets about diet and customs and history and whatnot, and a book of handy phrases in Arabic and Hebrew, and how to talk to Jewish women and Arab women, and Jewish girls and Arab girls, and how not in any way to think he could ask a girl of any description to go out with him. In this way to the station, can I have a key for my room? How many sisters and brothers do you have? And he had studied the backsides of the booklets because he was 17 and wanted to get on in the army. He had finally been let go from the orphanage, and he was never going back. And if he had to learn 1,000 booklets off by heart, he would do it gladly. Then the British left Palestine at the end of the year, or was it shortly after that, which anyway came to news as the sergeant for some reason, and all his learning was for nothing, and he was shipped off to Malaya instead, where the sins of empire were to continue. But yes, he had gathered a goodly amount of what in the end was to be of no use to him, except now, 50 years later, on this expensive terrace, with this curious man and the phrase kol nidre, which he knew because the relevant booklet had told him was sung on the eve of the Feast of Atonement. Atonement, that main part of the book. A word that had meant little to him when he was 17, but meant a great deal to him now. All your oaths and promises made during the year, and that you had failed to keep, to be put aside and canceled. And kol nidre, something that also meant nothing to him 50 years ago, something he longed for now. When he stood back again, smiling at Ronnie, nodding his head, he thought a bit foolishly because maybe he had been expected to shoot. He saw the little man had taken his cello between his legs and had lifted up the bow and placed it on a string, very dancer-like, very elegantly. This is back in present time. "Do you mind if I play?" he said. No, I would love you to play. I hear you all the time. Bach. I know the Bach. Do you know this by Bruch? By Bach? No, Bruch. Kol nidre. Bruch was a big old German Protestant, but he wrote this beautiful piece of Jewish music. He was going to say, yes, I know all about that, about the Day of Atonement and the vows and oaths we all failed to keep, and the mercy of being freed from that, but he said nothing. Let Rory McGillicuddy think he was an ignoramus. He had no wish to talk about Palestine and about when he was 17 and just months out of the orphanage. Anyway, Ronnie started to play the first long single note before he could speak. Tom sat back down on his chair. Was this not one of the nicest things had ever happened to him? A glass of whiskey, if never to be touched, and the last lights of a spring day being played to by a man to whom it was obviously possible to say stupid things, and he would not mind. This was a good trait in a man. He sank into his chair, deeper and deeper in his dark coat, and the cormorants 300 yards off, no doubt, heard the music too, their lives extended by Tom's reticence. His love of things put in front of him to view, his confusion, even his old guilt, his head full of gold and silver light. And likely the Tommelties heard it, and the young mother, Miss McNulty, and her little boy eating his tomatoes and sausages, for it was still only tea time. When he thought of the boy's sausages, his own sausages seemed suddenly companionable at his feet. Ronnie McGillicuddy didn't seem to hear the music himself exactly. His face had completely changed, had become serious, jumping with little expressive movements. His eyes shut tight, now and then throwing back his head, the locks stirring and swaying, not even looking at the music, and not so much listening as drawing the notes out of his very body. Here was the man without ears Tom had needed. He sat there, sinking deeper and deeper, mollified, gentled, and into his mind, his own eyes closed, floated the beloved face of June, his wife. The loved face. For the first time in a long time, he could gaze on it without fear. The first face when she was young, and all the other faces as the years went by. June's face floating, carrying every day of her life. And after the demise of Father Thaddeus Matthews, there had been many good days. He believed there had been, in the very aftermath, joy even, elation. Something fell away from her. She was like a woman who had been covered in cobwebs, a sort of crazy version of Miss Havisham and the orphan Estella rolled into one. Not in her wedding dress, maybe, but her communion robes. the strange marriage dress of a little Irish girl. Tom had been told a story that Miss Havisham was based on a real woman who'd lived in one of the big houses on St. Stephen's Green. Janie, it was Tracta Geary herself, full of old stories, had told him that. In what context, he couldn't remember. And the babies were so small, their children. There was so much to do for them, so much to marvel at. Maybe with Matthews gone, she felt a cordon of safety had been created for her children, for their childhoods. As they grew, himself and June passed all the stations of parenthood. The first day at school, which so shocked Joseph. He came home after the long day and said to June, "Well, Mammy, I will never have to do that again." She almost hadn't the heart to tell him it was going to be every day. Those 20 years or so, when the whole view, the only view from the slit of your tank window, as a person might say, was their doings. Their shoes, the imperial sequence of shoes, the galloping sizes, the clothes on their backs, the clothes on the sticks in the living room, on the line out the back, like the gallant flags of a medieval army in camp. And the marriage oftentimes like a game of jousting, not without its violent storms, the famous blazing rows that brought the children's eyes out on stalks of horror. Then rage subsiding, anger cooling, the little words that parents exchange in whatever provisional space they can access. "I'm sorry, June. I'm sorry, Tom." The bliss of reconciliation. The very key to peace in marriage, let alone Palestine, a thing he noted was still not achieved. Just to be still in yourself, like this stillness, as the notes of Kol Nidre pierced him like expertly handled needles. So there was no pain. The eternal nurse of all human experiences, sticking it in, voila, voila. Just to be still and apologize, to recognize the essential trouble and unfairness of even the love he measured as great in his private mind. The great love he sincerely believed he had for June. And in their bedroom, her magical clothes, her things, her small box of jewels, the sapphire bracelet he'd bought for her in Brereton's on Capel Street for one of her birthdays, the ivory drop earrings ditto, all the bits and bobs of gold and silver gathered over those years into a tiny harvest. As a woman without a mother, she was going to be herself a mother of mothers. Start everything again, and she always said to Winnie, "Sweetie, when you're grown and your poor old mother is no more, all these bits of jewelry will be yours, and you'll give them to your daughter." And Winnie would cry, "Mammy, Mammy, no, they won't, because you will never die." Every 2 years, having saved up like demons, they would all get on the ferry. You would catch it there on the banks of the Liffey, where warehouses and cranes bully-boyed the river, menacing, and sail to the Isle of Man, always staying in the same place, Gancy Cottage, run by the inestimable June's word, Herbert Quirk, and always doing the same things, regulation buckets and spades on the windy beach, stupendous heaps of fish and chips, and a brace of evenings for Tom and June, the raucous dance hall, June's idea of heaven, twisting and churning to the hits of the day. An essential item that also came on holiday with them was June's little radio. And he remembered those holidays to a soundtrack of Radio Caroline, which she played from morning till night. Till tea time, anyhow. She brought it into the jacks with her, the bathroom. She had it on in her bedroom when they snatched their 20 minutes of love, praying the children would somehow remain contented in the cottage garden for the duration. As a little boy, Joe's whole ambition as a human person was to be a Maud. He loved their swank and glamour in the town. He stared with admiring eyes and the racketing music of all the accents from Lanarkshire to Lancashire, the lads and lassies from Northern Ireland released for a week from the dampers of their war. On the Isle of Man, Winnie experienced her first kiss, aged 14, from an English boy. He remembered the extraordinary heat of June's body in the dance hall, the clothy dampness of her as she danced, and she had this sense of rhythm in her that he sorely lacked. But what matter? Dancers in those times never touched. They created, each and every one, a little solo locus of fury and ecstasy, except for the slow dance, the longed-for by Tom slow dance, when she gathered him into her arms, and all the sweaty loveliness of her face glowing, nearly red. Jesus, is my face gone red, Tom? Don't tell me. And her strong arms at that, and her soft, flat belly, even after 2 kids, and her cushiony breast. Oh, the heat of her, yes, the furnace, the mad beauty of that, the wild enjoyment, better than any fairground attraction, better even than any vista of lonesome sea. That perfected woman, his ideal, rouse and ruckus and contentions be damned, the beauty he measured all other beauties by, his rule, his template, the eternal shiningness of June. The music pierced him, the music calmed him, notes arranged by Mr. Bach, no Bruch. He held him still in his chair, his mind not jumping and running and raging, like an unruly horse under the hand of a whisperer. The poem that was his wife, floating clearly in front of his closed eyes. All that he had lost. Should he rage, or should he quietly mourn? He had the wild sense that, despite the tyranny of dates and time, she was there, not in memory, but really. And he was careful not to open those eyes. He knew the second he did so, she would be gone. He knew, but Ronnie McGillicuddy sawed his cello into sweetness, into 1,000 sweetnesses, an old Jewish tune being injected into Tom, injected into Ronnie himself, swaying and even muttering, like a lunatic, a poor assailed person, you would think, away with the fairies. They were both away with the fairies, and June was alive. She was alive, beautiful and wise, and she would always be there, bursting with life, calm as any old painted Madonna, as long as he didn't open his eyes. He lifted both his hands and reached up to hold that longed-for face, to hold it, the soft cheeks, the dark skin, to hold it, to hold it.